It's take Snazolol.
No, and we need to talk about their training.
No Snazolol?
No stanazolol.
Okay, so my legal team have advised me that we can't actually talk about Snazolol, so we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. We're going to have to talk about how you can structure your training so that you can look like you lift the weights that you do lift. Okay, so when it comes to weightlifting, you've got two main problems. You're too fat and you don't have enough muscle. Now, no matter who you are, no matter what size or shape you are, having more muscle, regardless of your body fat levels, will be a good start and will take you a long way to actually looking like you lift. Now, the problem with weightlifting, if you're just doing mostly snatch and clean and jerk, is the fact that you're missing something that's crucial to building muscle, and that's the fact that you don't have much eccentric loading. What's eccentric loading, you say? So quite simply put, the eccentric is when the muscle is lengthening under load. So if you imagine our bicep here, my bicep is lengthening in this portion. This is the eccentric. And then as it shortens under load, this is called the concentric portion of the lift. Now, fitness influencers on Instagram will argue about which portion of the lift is more important, whether that's a long eccentric or a fast concentric or pausing in between. But very few will argue the fact that having both eccentric and concentric loading is incredibly important for building muscle. So the problem with, say, just the clean, for example, is though even though my muscles are lengthening in this eccentric portion, we're not really getting any meaningful load on this eccentric portion of the lift because we're actively pulling under and the barbell isn't really applying a whole lot of force until we meet the barbell at the bottom, unless of course you absolutely overpull the barbell. This is pretty much why your legs are probably pretty jacked, is because you probably do a lot of barbell squatting, and as such you get a lot of eccentric and concentric loading on your legs. But it's probably why your upper body is missing a lot of muscle, is because you're getting very little concentric on the upper body. Now, we're not for a moment saying that concentric only lifting or largely concentric lifting won't build muscle. It absolutely will. But on the same vein as eccentric only loading won't build a lot of muscle or concentric only loading will build a lot of muscle, it's the fact that both of these put together are much more productive when we're trying to build the most amount of muscle for the least amount of work. Now, the great thing about weightlifting is the fact that we don't actually have to worry about sculpting our body or proportions. When it comes to building muscle for weightlifting, we basically just need to start adding some amount of upper body hypertrophy work to get a meaningful physique. Now, when it comes to building muscle for weightlifting, we're pretty much talking about our upper body exclusively. There's a massive chance that your lower body is probably maxed out in terms of the gains you want it to make. So what we're really talking about getting jacked for weightlifting, we really mean, how do I get my upper body more jacked? One of the first things I want you to consider is the fact that if we're going to be doing assistance work and we're trying to get more muscle in our upper body, we might as well try and pick some movements that are going to be useful for our weightlifting on top of looking better. So if we look at the areas we're trying to hit and how they might be useful for looking better, but also for a better weightlifting performance, we've got a couple of areas. We've got delts, tricep, lats, back, and core. If we can hit all of these areas in an efficient way as possible, we don't really want to be doubling our training time. We want to be in and out as quickly as we possibly can. Then there's a couple of movements that we can choose from that are going to pull these areas up and improve our looks and our weightlifting. Now, one of the first places I want you to start for the upper body musculature for weightlifting that's going to improve your looks and your weightlifting movements is some kind of press, preferably some kind of strict press. So if we take the strict press, we're getting huge amounts of triceps and delts in this movement while also improving our overhead stability for the snatch, or even something that's really important for a lot of you is how fast and smooth you lock out the barbell in the split jerk. Now, when it comes to strict pressing for weightlifting and muscle building, you can actually do pretty much any variation you want. Ideally, the gold standard would be standing strict press from the front rack, but you can do behind the neck, seated snatch grip, strict press, and you'll still get a huge amount of the benefits. Just imagine you'll have to use a little bit less weight, but the transfer, if you want to make it a bit more specific to your specific problem, will help. So if your lockout on the snatch sucks, maybe some snatch grip strict presses could go a long way to improving that, and it's still going to build a lot of muscle. Now, you don't have to limit yourself to the strict press, or you don't even have to do the strict press at all, even though I'd highly recommend that you do, and I'd highly recommend that you run the strict press programs on the Sika Strength app, where a lot of people have added a lot of kilos to their strict press. You could, for example, move on to something like weighted push-ups, or you could do something like weighted dips. As long as we're getting some kind of strict press motion or pressing motion, whether that be vertical or horizontal, under a load that's pretty stable. So I don't want you to go do weighted Bosu ring dips. I want you something that's progressible, something that can increase the load reliably, and then something that you can get up to a pretty decent load. So we're talking Chinese team circa 2012 doing 100 kilo weighted dips kind of thought process here, not resistant bands, sort of heavy, really unstable ring dips. Now, moving along to the upper back, most weightlifters, regardless of physique, don't do anywhere near enough upper back work for all the movements they're trying to improve. Your upper back is involved in your overhead stability, your pulling positions, your receiving positions, and everything in between. And so your upper back is crucial to the function of your lifts, how you look, and how stable and how good your technique is. Now, one of my personal favorites is something like dumbbell seal rows. However, it doesn't really matter exactly what you do because there's lots of great options here. You might prefer horizontal cable rows. You might even prefer weighted pull-ups. As long as you can pick something that can be loaded and that you can progress it over a good range of motion, and if you're going to stick with it, you're going to see the benefits to that. Now again, some exercises are useless, but there's quite a few of them that are available to us that will have a great benefit. Now, I want you to take a moment while we're still on the upper back work. The fact that when you're doing your upper back, I want you to try and remove your lower back from the equation. The problem with weightlifting is the fact that it's very lower back intensive. So if we're doing lots of snatching, lots of clean pulls, snatch pulls, back squats, front squats, our lower back is going to be pretty fatigued anyway. And so if we come and do our upper back work that's involving a lot of lower back, or it's going to require us to stabilize our lower back, we're not going to get as good bodybuilding done, and we're probably going to make our weightlifting a little bit worse temporarily because our lower back is going to be even more fatigued. Now, when it comes to the core or the lower back, we need to start thinking about this like we would any other exercise. We wouldn't necessarily do a load of isometrics to try and build our core work for our biceps or our quads. And sometimes, for some reason, the lower back and core kind of fall into this little template for whatever reason that might be. We want you to be thinking about moving your core and your lower back through a reasonable amount of flexion and extension under load with a technique that makes sense. And for us, it's really hard to go wrong with something like a weighted sit-up for a core or something like a prone back extension, 45-degree back extension for that lower back. The reason we want to do this is because we need to take these muscles through a solid range of motion if we want to improve the stability, the positions of those, and potentially some of the aesthetic appeal of those. Now, once we've narrowed down our exercise selection for the different areas, I want to talk about something that's pretty important, and that's the loading. What I want you to do is zone in on a few select exercises and stick with these as consistently as you can for as long as you'll be able to entertain yourself while doing them. I really want you to push a few select exercises. So let's say we take strict press, weighted dips, and weighted pull-ups, and seal rows, for example. Let's say we choose those 4 exercises. I want you to try and push these as far as you can in terms of volume and intensity over the course of a couple of weeks to months, if that's an option for you. I don't want you walking around the gym, picking a couple of random exercises, doing them half-assed, and then not revisiting these exercises again for another couple of weeks. You're going to make very little progress there. It's going to get boring. You're just going to stop doing your assistance work. Your weightlifting is going to get worse. You're not going to look any better, and nobody's going to be happy. Okay, so I know you guys like programming and I know you like the nitty-gritty details of actually how do you structure these in sessions. What I want you to do is pick 2 to 3 weightlifting sessions per week. After that training session, I want you to set aside 15 to 20 minutes maximum after that session. Then I want you to pick your select few exercises. Maybe that's 3 or 4 per session. I want you to superset these exercises. So let's say, for example, we have strict press, weighted pull-ups, and weighted sit-ups. I want you to superset the strict press and the weighted pull-ups. I want you to do these as quickly as possible, and then I want you to finish that session with the weighted sit-ups. And I want you to do this for all these sessions. I want you to condense down the time in the gym. I don't want you wasting too much time in the gym and spending extra time doing things you don't need to do. And then I want you to repeat this process with the other exercises that you've selected. So this might mean that you've doubled up on some exercises. So you might be doing weighted sit-ups twice a week. You might be doing weighted pull-ups twice a week. Whatever makes sense for you, I want you to zone in on that. Okay, so now that we've structured this and we have an idea of where we're going to be putting some of our training, I want you to think about how you can progress these exercises. Now, when it comes to athletes who are primarily focused on performance, such as speed, power, and strength, we don't really want to push the intensity of these exercises too far in the lower rep ranges. There's a couple of reasons for this. Your neural drive, your ability to maximally contract your musculature is going to be reduced because you're doing a sport which is heavy squats and heavy pulls and fast lifts. And that side of the fatigue in your body is going to be taxed pretty far. What I want you to focus more on and leave this door open for you is some higher volume work where you still push the intensity. So for example, let's say we're doing 4x10 on our seal row. I want you to stay slightly on the side of that higher volume work. So we might do 10s for 4 to 5 weeks, but then slowly increase the weights you're using. Now there's a couple of ways you could do this. You could literally start with the same weight and keep it the same for 5 weeks and add volume per week for the next 5 weeks. You could pick the same rep range. So you could do 4x10 4x10 and then add weight while staying at 4x10 for the next couple of weeks. Or for example, you could do the traditional path where we start at something like 4x12 and slowly work our way down to 4x8 while also increasing the weight on the barbell or the dumbbell or whatever implement you're using. Because contrary to what you hear online, volume will build muscle mass and it's not going to fatigue you so much that you won't be able to do anything. We just need to look at what kind of fatigue do we normally incur in our training, what kind of fatigue do we have room to grow with in our training, and generally in this case, when you're a weightlifter trying to be fast and powerful and strong, that higher volume work is one, going to help you build muscle for sure, but it's also going to have an added benefit which we think is hugely important in weightlifters, and that's going to assist a little bit in your ability to produce work done, aka work capacities, your ability to just do more training. While cardio will help with this, higher volume training in your main lifts will help with this, increasing the volume and the decreasing the time with which you do your assistance work is incredibly useful for doing this. It will help you build muscle and it's going to be almost indiscernible from the max high intensity amount of muscle that you would have built if you do top sets of 8 in 1 set per session. But for you, you're going to get a little bit of extra benefit if you wear on the side of higher volume assistance work. It's not going to fatigue you too much for your training because the weights will be relatively lighter and you'll build up this work capacity which will then allow you to do a little bit more weightlifting, allow you to do a little bit more hypertrophy work, and as a result you're covering a couple of different areas that are going to satisfy your weightlifting and your physique. Now, before we move on to part 2 of getting leaner while doing weightlifting, I really want to emphasize that a lot of you can build way more muscle mass while you're natural on the same calories that you are currently than you would actually think. Most of you just haven't really put in a diligent amount of time in building muscle mass. Most weightlifters skip their assistance exercise. I know, I can see the programs you're running on the Sika Strength app. I can see when you skip your assistance exercise because you can't press complete on the session unless you put in what you did. And I know lots of you, Dara knows it too, that you're skipping your assistance exercise. But I promise you, if you give diligent work for 3 or 4 months while you're doing your assistance exercises and you put a little bit more emphasis on what you're trying to build for your upper body, you will see meaningful results. Now, if you want help with that, check out the Upper Body Body Armor program on the Sika Strength app. Now let's look at part 2, getting leaner for weightlifting. Part 2 is getting leaner for weightlifting. Now, getting leaner, no matter where your muscle mass levels are right now, regardless if you don't add any muscle mass, is almost always going to make you look better. No matter if you're 60 or 100 kilos, getting leaner will give you the appearance of more muscle mass. Getting lean isn't the problem. Getting lean while maintaining or trying to improve your weightlifting performance is a tough problem to solve. There's 2 main consequences that primarily either increasing your output to burn more calories or decreasing your calories to get leaner while weightlifting will have on your weightlifting performance. The first one is you're simply going to have less energy while you're doing weightlifting. If you're working a job, if you have relationships, if you have children, you've probably got several other things in your life that are competing with weightlifting for your time and energy. Decreasing your calories is only going to make a sport like weightlifting even harder. Weightlifting is hard enough as it is, and it gets even worse when you've barely 150 to 200 grams of carbs per day. Now, the second thing that's going to be impacted by your caloric deficit and your weight loss is your top end strength. In some cases, some of you, due to your training age, your genetic capability, you're going to be able to maintain a lot of your strength. Some of you will be much more impacted by caloric deficit and weight loss, and depending on how much weight you lose, your top end strength is going to be reduced anywhere from 5 to 20%, depending on how drastic the calories that you cut are and how much weight you're actually losing. Now, this is good and bad in some ways, but regardless, unless you're absolutely milling milligrams of gear, you're going to lose some strength, or at the very least, unless you're a brand new beginner, you're not going to gain any strength for quite a while. Now, given time, your strength probably will return, so you're going to see a bit of a drastic decrease for a while, again, depending on your genetics and strength. But after a while, at your new body weight, you'll probably see a little bit of an increase on that number. You might get close to your old number, or you might even be able to hit it again. Given even more sufficient time and smart training, you could possibly even get beyond that number. So unless you had an absolutely enormous number, for example, a 300 kilo back squat, you're probably not going to be able to get beyond that at a lower body weight. However, if you're someone who's been training for 3 years, you've back squatted 150 kilos, when you lose weight, we could expect maybe somewhere in a year's time with diligent training, as you settle into your new body, your leaner, more athletic body, you could probably start to add numbers to that again, because you're probably pretty far from your genetic capability. Now, that's assuming you're not genetic mush, which could be the case. Now, what's even more interesting about weight loss while you're weightlifting is the fact that your relative power will probably increase. So your power to weight ratio is something that's really important in weightlifting. This will probably get a lot better. So if you think about this, as you get leaner, you're going to get more from your squat and your pull for your snatch and clean and jerk. What's even more interesting in a lot of your cases is that when you lose body weight, you probably won't notice much of a decrease in your snatch and clean and jerk top end performance once you peak for it again. In fact, in some cases, the quality of lifting will probably improve. Your mobility will get better, your speed will get better, and some of the positions you can hit, for example, with your upper back will improve as you're pulling and catching in the snatch and clean and jerk. What's even more interesting is that at this new lighter body weight, the more you increase your squat, if you can do that, or get back to your old squat numbers, will probably mean that you can get more out of that squat per lift. So your efficiency will increase. Now, don't take this too far. Efficiency is one thing, but 20 extra kilos on your squat is another thing, and it's far more superior in most cases. Now, if we take the fact that caloric deficit is basically the only way we're going to lose a meaningful amount of body weight or body fat, could I introduce you to my little friend known as cardio? Now, I know what you're thinking, cardio, conditioning for weightlifting, f*** you Garth, but give me a second and I'll give you some of the benefits. Now, there's tons of benefits that cardio will give your weightlifting and your strength training, but one of the most important ones is an increased caloric output. Now, I know we hear this a bit, and it's true to a certain extent, is exercise doesn't burn a huge amount of calories, but it still does burn a certain amount of calories, and for a lot of us, if we're cutting at maybe 2,500 calories, 2,220 calories, 2,000 calories, the difference, maybe 200, 300 calories per day, can make a huge amount of difference to both our physiological well-being, how many extra micronutrients and macronutrients we're fitting in, but it'll also just make a difference to the psychological benefit of having an extra snack, an extra meal if you're intelligent, or just slightly bigger meals over the course of the day. Now, when it comes to cardio or conditioning for weightlifting, and if you've never done it before, I don't actually want you to go to town on cardio and conditioning because it is going to kill your weightlifting performance temporarily. You're just not going to be able to tolerate both of these efficiently. What I want you to do, if you're brand new to this and you do want to add in some cardio into your training while weightlifting, I want you to start off with 2 sessions per week. I want you to pick a fixed stationary piece of equipment like a rower, a bike erg, maybe a ski erg, and I just want you to do 15 minutes per session. That's all I want you to do for the first month. The next month, what I want you to do is keep going twice a week, and I want you to add 5 minutes to those sessions. So month 1, we're doing 15 minutes twice a week. Month 2, we're doing 20 minutes twice a week, and I want you to keep doing that until you get to somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour. Now, this is usually where we'll see most of the benefit in terms of caloric output and balancing that with being able to recover for training. This process will take a while. If we want to meaningfully adapt this while still progressing your weightlifting, going low and slow is really useful. After about 6 months, you should see a meaningful difference in your terms of your quality of life and its impact on how fast and how quickly you can recover between sets and sessions for weightlifting. Now, there's a pitfall that some weightlifters kind of fall into here, and some strength training athletes, is that when we start doing a bit of conditioning, we start to think, oh, I can eat way more food. This is definitely 100 grams of carbs extra per day, right? But in reality, it's going to be subtle, and it's not something you're going to notice until you've gotten to that higher level of conditioning. So I want you to work up there over time. It's going to aid as you're getting to that place, but don't forget the fact that ultimately a caloric deficit is the main thing that's going to impact your fat loss and the quality of your training. Now, I want you to do one thing for me. We're not a nutrition company. We don't really like talking about the specifics of nutrition. We understand the importance for weightlifting and strength training and athletes, of course. But there's one thing that we see people doing all too often, especially when it comes to that amateur athlete, is when they want to lose weight, the first question we say is, okay, cool, send me a week of all the meals you actually eat. And you get 2 things. You get one, you get a bucket full of bullshit. And I know that's not what you're actually eating per day, because that adds up to about 1,500 calories and you're about 25% body fat. Or you get something where you never hear about that again, because suddenly counting calories becomes a lot harder and it requires a bit more discipline than we're usually used to. Some of you will be used to this when you come from other sports, but if you're new to weightlifting or if you've been weightlifting for a while, start counting your calories, and this is the best place to start. Once you get a handle on what you're eating and record absolutely everything, I mean everything. If you're recording your calories, you can take a look at my food log and you will see while I'm cooking dinner, you'll notice that there'll be 4 biscuits added in there randomly, because you need to track, otherwise you're not going to know what's going to happen. So while I don't want to give you the specifics of what you should be eating and what the macro split should be, but I can say confidently, if you're not tracking, you're wasting your time. Now, we'll be doing a longer lecture for everyone who signs up for the app in November. It's going to be talking about some of the process for cutting weight and how we manipulate things around that. This will be a longer lecture, and it's going to be available to anyone who signs up for the app in November, or obviously current app users. Get the app at app.sikastrength.com. Don't forget to check out the coach feature which we've added. We've gotten rid of the AI chatbot a couple of weeks ago, and we've been flat out on that coach bot. Dara and I and Callum will be soon answering all your questions to get you the best quality service. You get direct contact, Dara and I, Monday to Friday for the price of your subscription. And in the new year, while the price will be going up a little bit, you'll also be able to get video feedback every month.